Sziasztok, az USA fővárosából, Washingtonból jelentkezünk. Itt fogok találkozni hamarosan Bernie Sanders-szel, a nemzetközi baloldal egyik legnagyobb hatású politikusával. Nemrég jelent meg új kötete, It's okay to be angry about capitalism, vagyis oké, ha dühös vagy a kapitalizmus miatt. A beszélgetésünkben érinteni fogjuk a kapitalizmust, a klímaváltozást, illetve beszélgetünk arról is, hogy mit lehet tenni a szélső jobboldal előretörése ellen. Tartsatok velünk! Senator Sanders, thank you very much for accepting this invitation.
My pleasure.
So let's start with the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, because back at that time, mostly right-wing demagogues were able to capitalize from the popular outrage. And right now we are in the midst of yet another economic crisis. So how can the left be more agile this time around, representing working people?
Well, I think what happened, 2008 was very significant for American politics, because what we saw is absolute fraud on the part of Wall Street. We saw the collapse of the economy, massive unemployment, people lost their homes, they lost their life savings, and then they looked to see what happened to the executives on Wall Street who caused the crisis. And you know what happened to them? Nothing. Zero. Not one of them went to jail for the fraud that they committed. And I think that was part of the process of causing severe doubts about the ability of government to address the issues of justice in general and the needs of working people in particular.
Talking about right-wing politicians, for example, our Prime Minister Viktor Orbán rising power because he promised, let's say, security for the working people, but of course, after he got elected, he betrayed them.
I think what you're seeing in this country, we call it Trumpism,
yes,
probably not dissimilar from Orbán, is this reality that in a globalized economy, we are seeing many, many people, especially in rural areas, seeing a significant decline in their standard of living. Often people in the metropolitan areas are doing okay, but rural people are not doing well. And in this country and around the world, you have right-wing demagogues who are talking to those people who are hurting. And in my view, what I've tried to do in this country with other progressives is to come up with an agenda which speaks to their needs. Working people, low-income people, have a right to quality healthcare, a right to quality education, a right to decent paying jobs. As we combat climate change, they have a right to take advantage of the new jobs being created, transforming our energy system. And I think too often establishment parties in Europe and in the United States have kind of forgotten about the pain that those people are experiencing, and demagogues have come in and filled that gap.
And you are writing about this in your book in details, but I'm really curious on your opinion, so please expand on this. So what should the contemporary left focus on in order to go against right-wing extremism?
What we are seeing right now in this country and all over the world is unprecedented income and wealth inequality. That's a global phenomenon. In America, you got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. You got a few thousand oligarchs all over the world who have unbelievable power over the global economy. We have got to address that reality front and center. Can we create a planet in which all of our people, this is not utopian thinking, not great socialist ideology, but given all of the new technology, an increase in worker productivity, can you create an economy that works for all? Or are you going to continue to have a few people with incredible wealth while so many people are struggling? That's issue number one. Issue number 2, in this country, if you can believe it, and it's important for people in Europe to understand this, in terms of the wages that the average American worker is receiving right now, in inflation adjusted for dollars, they're not higher than they were 50 years ago. Can you believe that? Think about all of the technology, all of the increase in worker productivity. People are going nowhere in a hurry, and their kids are going to be in worse shape than they are. The next generation in America might have a lower standard of living than their parents. Those are the issues that we've got to talk to. But unfortunately, because in this country and around the world, you have corrupt political systems by which big money supports the establishment, we are not having the success we should have.
From where I look at it, so, I'm observing the American progressive movements, and I think there is a serious lack of engagement with, like-minded movements, activists all around the world who are fighting against economic inequalities, injustices. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And if yes, then what should the contemporary left, the progressive movements here in America, do in order to establish a more, stable, a more powerful engagement with all of these movements around the world?
There's no question. Just a few weeks ago, we had 2 young women here from the French Parliament who are progressives. And as you know, they're in France right now. It's a huge struggle over retirement ages, and hundreds of thousands of people are going out into the streets. To answer your question, there is far too little cooperation between the left of the Labour Party in the UK, in France, and we certainly know almost nothing about what's going on in Hungary and Central America, in Central Europe. So yes, there's much more work to be done.
But what is your explanation? So why is that? Because, why we are sitting here right now, there is an ongoing CPAC in Hungary organized by GOP people from America in cooperation with Orbán's people. And, it's a very strong, very established network, not just in Hungary, but in Brazil, in Africa. You can name all of these countries and continents.
Well, the problem we have here is obviously the Republican Party is sympathetic to Orbán. And the Democratic Party is, by and large, we are trying to change it, a corporatist party. So they're not prepared to stand up to the corporate world. So it is left to relatively few of us in the progressive movement to try to work with our comrades all over the world in the fight for workers' rights and economic and social justice.
Do you think Orbán has any kind of an impact on the thinking of the GOP establishment?
Yes, I do. I mean, to be honest with you, it was rather astounding that there were American conservatives, who went to Hungary to, in a sense, honor somebody who was trying to undermine Hungarian democracy. All right? That was kind of weird. And then they invited him here to speak as well. So for right-wing Republicans to look at an anti-democratic leader in Hungary as some kind of model is rather extraordinary and terribly unfortunate.
Do you think Orbán poses any kind of a threat on the democracy here in the US?
No, not a threat, but the fact that you have people in our country holding up an anti-democratic leader as some kind of model, it just tells you how far these right-wing people have gone in America in terms of undermining our belief in democracy.
Okay, let's talk about geopolitical competition, because you were very generous where you were describing the achievements of the Biden administration. You praised the infrastructure package and the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, in your book, you went into details about your criticism, but mostly your opinion was positive. And I'm asking because I have a question, because, in Europe, there are serious, concern about that these measures would lead to job and wage losses in Europe for the European workers. Do you see ways in which we could quit the vicious circle of certain segments of the global working class being strengthened at the expense of other workers in other places of the world?
Of course, we need solidarity among the working class all over this country. We just celebrated May Day. That's, a point that I tried to make. So we don't want to see what we're doing in this country hurting workers abroad. We don't want to see, what workers abroad are doing hurting us. That issue actually has been of more concern to me, and I paid more attention to it in terms of large corporations leaving the United States. We have seen the shutdown of thousands and thousands of factories in this country as they went to Mexico or they went to China, paying people really starvation wages. And what we have wanted to see is a trade policy in this country which works for our people, works for people all over the world, and not just one that benefits large corporations.
But do you think that's feasible with the current administration?
I know Joe Biden, and Biden himself is a decent guy. He is a moderate to liberal type Democrat who did some really good things. The American Rescue Plan that we passed in the early part of the pandemic was one of the most significant pieces of legislation passed in modern history. And he was prepared to go further in terms of what we call Build Back Better, which would have been maybe the most consequential piece of legislation since the 1930s, which really would have taken on the structural crises that we face in every part of our life. So I admired him for willingness to do that. He was willing to think really big. On other issues, not so big. But we are where we are right now, and our task is twofold to my mind. Number one is making sure that Trumpism is defeated, and it's not a guarantee that it will be. We are up against a real fight. Republican Party moving very, very far to the right.
Do you seriously think Donald Trump will rerun for presidency next year?
No one can predict, but I would say he is the likely Republican nominee. And if he is the nominee, he should not be discounted. He will run a strong campaign. He has a chance to win. I think he probably won't, but he has a chance to. And he has allies in governor's chairs all over this country. So beating Trumpism is one thing. But getting back to your earlier question, what we have got to do is build a progressive movement which is stronger than where we are right now. And that means bringing working people together who are black and white and Latino and gay and straight and everybody else together in a movement that works for working people and not just the people on top.
I'm asking this especially because there is a lot of talk about an emerging potential new Cold War between the US and China.
Yes.
And we see the war in Ukraine. And, if we are taking a look on the major powers in the global south, we see that most of the time, justifiably, they have concerns about the involvement of the United States. What are the main principles that should guide our thinking about these issues?
I am very worried about this Cold War with China. And it is being precipitated by the military-industrial complex here. Last year in the United States, we increased military spending by $80 billion in 1 year. This year, they're coming back for more, an extraordinary increase. I have very serious concerns about what's going on in China. China is becoming more autocratic. They are treating some of their minorities, the Uyghurs, terribly, cracking down on dissent. And I have real concerns about that.
Yeah.
But I hope that we can reverse this trend to trying to create a Cold War with China, which, by the way, among other things, will make it really impossible for us to address the climate crisis that the planet is facing. China is the major emitter in the world of carbon. The United States is number two. We've got to get together. And if we have a Cold War, that probably is not going to happen. In terms of Russia, I was disgusted. I really was, almost physically sick by the actions of Putin. That war was totally avoidable. Some of his concerns about the encroachment of NATO could have absolutely been dealt with. It was hard to believe, but Europeans know this better than I. We had thought that 1945 was the end of those types of wars. So to see the kind of brutality and the loss of life that is taking place right now is just horrific.
Will you think the increasing involvement of the US in the war in Ukraine would help to start a negotiation about peace?
Look, I don't know the answer to the question. I think, though, that what Putin did was atrocious, and I think if he gets away with that, his expansionism might lead to other countries and even more serious wars.
And my very last question, and thank you very much for your time. Climate change is a serious issue. And just a couple of days ago, I talked with Professor Paul Krugman about the issue. And he was quite sure that we still have the time to tackle down and stop and win the race against climate change. But people in my country and everywhere in the world who are younger than me are strongly skeptical about that promise. They don't see that, we are on the positive side of the race. They don't see that we have a chance to win climate change. Do you seriously think that we still have the chance?
Climate change is already causing devastating problems throughout the world. Already trillions of dollars in damage in terms of agriculture, in terms of extreme weather disturbances, in terms of drought, in terms of migration. It's already happening. All right? So we're losing in that sense. What you're asking, I think, is it yet possible to prevent a total and absolute catastrophe for the planet. What scientists who know a lot more than I do about that, they're saying time is running out. That no one denies that there's going to be a whole lot of damage being done. But every day that we do not act forcefully and dramatically and transformationally is a day lost. So I don't know that anybody knows the answer to your question. You're really talking about it's a doomsday, aren't you? Is that possible? Yes, it is. And I will tell you that the good news is that in this country, we've made some progress. I mean, there's legislation that put more money into energy transformation than any time in American history. The bad news is you still got a lot of people out there, a lot of Republicans out there, who almost deny the reality of climate or who do nothing more than give lip service to addressing it. They are still propping up the fossil fuel industry and the oil companies. And that is pretty pathetic, but that is the reality.
But do you think without a comprehensive reform of the functions of capitalism, do we win the race? Can we win the race against climate change?
I don't know the answer to that.
Can market fix the problem?
What will have to happen is a recognition. Look, if you are a large corporation who has kids and you're the CEO and you have children and grandchildren, are you that crazy not to be worried about what kind of planet your kids and grandchildren are going to inherit? And the other thing, it's not just capitalism. In this case, we have, as we talked about earlier, a Cold War with China. Russia is now in an active war. Can you address the problem of the world? What makes climate change unique, an American issue. It's not a Hungarian issue.
No,
it is a global issue. And if the planet does not come together, the countries of this world do not come together, it will not be solved. China and the United States have got to work on it together, among others. Thank you very much, Senator. And my very, very last question. There are ongoing protests right now in Hungary. Students are on the streets. They are fighting for better education. A lot of other sectors in Hungary are fighting for better, services of the state, a welfare state. Do you have any kind of a message to those people who are struggling and who are demonstrating for a better Hungary, for a better future? Yes. My word is keep up the fight. Everybody in Hungary, everybody in America is entitled to good quality public services, decent housing, decent healthcare, decent educational opportunities. We have seen an explosion of technology in recent years, and that should improve life for all of our people, not just make the rich richer. So I wish these young people very well in their struggle for a decent standard of living and for dignity in Hungary. Senator Sanders, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you very much. Thanks.